Is this thing on? Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Lewis Harris. I created the Record in Progress podcast because I was relatively surprised at the outcome of the 2024 presidential election. I created this podcast because I think we need to share perspectives, stories, and narratives to create understanding to eventually get to a better world for all of us and a more unified society. And so I have my next guest, which I'm very privileged to have. And he is somebody who is, I think it would be appropriate to say he's a rabble rouser and one who has made a stake, I think a pretty clear stake here in Snohomish County over the years. And so would love for you all to hear his perspective. And I'm going to go ahead and have you introduce yourself.
Yes, I am a rabble rouser. I prefer the term revolutionary because I think you have to rouse some rabbles in order to get revolution. But I think you and I probably have very similar goals for the most part. We need a better world, a world that works for all of us. And it clearly does not right now. And I think that fact really impacted the election. I'm going to enjoy having a conversation with you about this.
Yeah, totally. So, Jason, again, thanks for being here with us. How do you identify yourself? And just for folks who are listening, this is not a prescriptive, how do you identify yourself? It's really just how do you see yourself?
I think I don't see myself as more or less important than anybody else. I am a straight white working class guy with a couple of kids and a house. I feel very fortunate and grateful in this economy, having read a news article the other day that I think it was the median or the mean, and I don't remember which without having the article in front of me, that the median home buying age in America right now is 56 years old. And I think that was for first time home buyers, which I think is a really powerful picture, snapshot of where we are today with our economy for people. I consider myself a representative of the working class. I was a high school teacher for almost 20 years. I did some rabble rousing as a union activist in the Snohomish County school districts because my goal was to make things better for my students. I always said I didn't work for the school district, I worked for my students. And anybody who has been a parent in this school district knows that things are not ideal. And certainly if you're a teacher, you know that things are not ideal. And I would go to bat for my principals. Of course, that necessarily put me at odds with administration. And eventually somebody said, don't hire this guy. And so I got pushed out of education because I challenged the system. And I think that's, again, a snapshot of where we are in this country, that if you choose to challenge the status quo, you're gonna pay a price. I think in a perfect world, I probably could have stayed being a teacher for my entire career and happily retired as a teacher because I really did enjoy the classroom. I was very good at my job. I will say that, and I've got the stats to prove it. And the kids really appreciated somebody who was honest with them and knew that they cared about them. And I think the system lost out on that one. But that's really what I do. I have lofty principles. I think we can do better. I really think that it's important to identify areas that we can do better. And I think it's important to identify the individuals and the systems that are preventing necessary change. And one of the things that has me very, very concerned right now is the fact that climate is essentially going off the cliff and it's going to be impacting us all. I should mention I ran for Congress in second district 3 times. And one of the things that I had as a highlight message was here we are with more coastline in Washington's second district than most districts in the country. And we stand to be substantially impacted by that. And I thought that the voters would pay a little bit more attention to that because it is coming. It is absolutely coming. I think until things actually get here and they are really smacking us in the face, people tend to stick their heads in the sand a bit. And if people are comfortable with the status quo, they tend to stick with the status quo. So that goes beyond what you were asking me. But in terms of the things that we are, that I am, how I see myself and what I'm fighting for, that's a big part of it. And my history in the education system is also a big part of it because I'm willing to take personal risks, which I don't think a lot of people are willing to do. in order to make change. And that doesn't mean that I necessarily think I'm going to get the change that I'm fighting for. I'm willing to be somewhat of a sacrificial lamb in order to say, look, I'm willing to stand up for my principles. And I do say that knowing that in this society, it is much easier for a white man to do that from the position of institutional
Yeah.
privilege that I come from. And so my goal is class equality. I'll
Yes.
be open.
Yes.
I'm very much a socialist, if not a communist. I don't mind saying that out loud. I think we're at a place where those words don't have the negative impact that they used to have coming out of the Cold War. I think younger generations are much more open to socialism. I think that scares the pants off older generations. But for me, and the people that I see in today's society who are fighting for change, I don't think that they fear socialism the way older generations used to. And I in order to achieve that change, we have to have radical change. And as I said again, I'm very much willing to put myself at the forefront, knowing that I can probably weather the hits better than a lot of other people can.
Thank you for introducing yourself. Full introduction, by the way, which is great because the audience that I'm hoping to get in this podcast, I really want them to understand different perspectives, right? And your perspective is very unique. I want to unpack some of the things you said, but you did say a lot. I want to thank you for taking the stance that you do as a privileged white male, or as a white male who is privileged in society, however you want to take that, because being somebody in the social justice movement here locally, which you know me through that, we do need not only allies, but people who are willing to break some things to show how the world can be a better place or how institutions are failing the working class, really, which includes so many people, right?
Almost
And
everybody, almost everybody, you
not
know,
only everybody, but everybody that the pundits and folks out of this election are saying you voted for Trump, right? And so I'm curious because we're going to get into these questions, but I'm really curious because since that is your grounding, which is an important grounding, I'm curious some of what your strategies or what are some of the things that either Democrats didn't do that Republicans did do that garnered the support that Republicans and Trump got this year.
I mean, I guess I would maybe turn that question back on you because, as you know, I'm no longer a Democrat. In fact, I should say also that I was Jill Stein's campaign manager throughout this last election cycle. I was very honored to do that. I felt that that was a position of great privilege that also gave me an opportunity to network around the country with like-minded people. I feel like the Green Party, for all of its problems, and that's not even really worth getting into, but the platform that the Green Party has written down, or if you go to Jill Stein
Yeah.
2024, it's still up there. The things that we were fighting for, which are real climate justice and getting off of fossil fuels and guaranteed housing and federal jobs guarantee and Medicare for all, those were really a Bernie Sanders agenda for the
Right.
most part. It was really a Bernie Sanders agenda. We added in things like we're supportive of Native American sovereignty, which I think is something that really falls by the wayside, and also a reparations agenda, which I think the Democratic Party sort of half-heartedly signals at, but it has no real plan to do anything about. So what the Democrats, and I guess I will sort of frame this in my time on the Washington State Democrat Central Committee, because I was there for 4 years. And it was that experience that really helped me decide that I had to leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party for me was absolutely a non-starter, non-functional, was not getting us anywhere. Had to do with actually the platform. Like, what is it that we stand for? And so in 2018, as a member of the Snohomish County Democrats, we passed what I thought was an incredible platform. In fact, I think you were there for all of that. And we sat around my kitchen table, a group of us sat around my kitchen table week after week after week to develop what we thought the ideal society would be. And it didn't have anything to do with socialism or any isms. It was just, these are the policies that we want to have in place. And that platform passed, I think, virtually unanimously with the Snohomish County Democrats. So I felt like we were all on the same page. These are the things that we want to fight for. And we
Right.
took a lot of that up to the state level and passed a lot of it at the state level. So that was in 2018 that we passed it was an incredibly progressive platform, most of which I think is still on the books for the
Right.
Washington State Democrats. But the thing that really, and this goes to, I think, answering your questions, is like, okay, we've got these principles on the table. Where's the accountability now for our elected representatives?
Right.
And the answer I got was so dissatisfying. It was basically that there is none. No,
Right.
we're not going to hold our representatives at the state level or the federal level accountable to any of this stuff. And in fact, a mutual friend of ours, who I'm not going to name right now, told me in 2018, and he had been there for a while. He said, Jason, you don't understand. The platform is to placate people like yourself. It's to make people think like yourself think that you are doing something useful. Understand that the executive board and the people who are in office do not care about the platform. They care about getting reelected. So you can be high and mighty about these platform ideals all you want, but there is nothing that you can do to hold anybody accountable. In fact, when I started to have those accountability questions at the state committee, that is when the state committee got very, very hostile with me, because I said, look,
Right.
we said what we stood for. Now, are we going to mean it or not? And they did not like that at all. So now,
Yes.
fast forward to why the Democrats lost in this election, and why people might have gone to Trump. It wasn't necessarily that, I mean, on
Yeah.
balance, obviously more people voted for Trump. It was that far fewer people voted for Democrats,
That's right.
right? There was a whole segment of the population that basically dropped out. And who were those people? They were younger people, which we would consider the 18 to 34-year-old
Sure.
voting
Sure.
people that we consider the younger voters. In
Yep.
fact, I
Yep.
think it's like that's the age group that you would be considered a young Democrat if you're in the Young
Mhm.
Democrats caucus,
Yes.
right?
That's right.
That voting block basically dropped out. Like millions of those people did not show up.
Right.
Why? Because
Yeah.
they're the people who have to face this future
Mm.
of climate disaster, of economic instability, where through the pandemic, the billionaire class doubled and tripled
Right.
their wealth while we couldn't even get paychecks to stay at home. What did the Biden
Right.
administration they gave us? Like Trump gave people more money in their pockets directly, not a whole lot more, but more money in their pockets directly than Biden did.
Right.
And so there are so many factors of this. We know now that a third of the people who died during COVID died through lack of a functional healthcare system. And we know the strain that was put on the hospital system. The fact that tens of millions of Americans have no insurance or
Mhm.
are, if people are looking at 4 years of Joe Biden and saying, what did I
Right.
get out of this?
Right.
It wasn't there. It wasn't
Right.
there. I know the pundits and the elites of the Democratic Party have their own perspective on whether the Biden administration was successful or not. But the average working person could not possibly look at 4 years of Joe Biden and say, this worked out for me, because it
That's right.
didn't, you know? And
Yep.
that's what hits people at the voting booth. And in
Yeah.
this case, a lot of those people didn't go vote for Trump. They
Right.
simply didn't vote at all.
Right.
Right.
Right. And so it's one of those things where I'm reconciling some of the language that Trump has been using, an overwhelming mandate that myself and the Republican Congress was elected. And the reality is, it depends on how you look at it, right? Because he apparently didn't get a significant number more votes than he did last time. And the number differentiation was based on people not showing up and not voting.
That's exactly right. And Democrats really need to take a cold, hard look at that, and
Yes.
try and
Which is why
figure
I'm
out
glad.
why that is. I mean,
That's it.
why? Just take myself. Like I worked with the Democratic Party, like in my youth in the '90s when I was in college, and when I got my start in politics and activism. I voted for Ralph Nader. I voted for Ralph Nader in '96 and 2000. And so my politics have always leaned green / progressive / socialist. But I joined the Democratic Party. Like I went full throat into the Democratic Party in 2003 because the Bush administration was such an absolute nightmare. And my first political sector of interest was the anti-war movement. And
Okay.
so I was out in the streets over the Iraq War weekend after weekend after weekend.
Right.
And I said, okay, well, the most important thing right now is getting George Bush out of office. And that didn't happen. But I was then convinced that Obama would be okay. We've got hope and change. I believe it. I literally shed tears when Obama was elected, thank God. And where are we right now? We are in a place right now where the
So much cringe.
Democratic Party thought that it was a good idea to rehabilitate the worst war criminal in this century of the United States, Dick Cheney. They thought saying Dick Cheney is on our side was a good thing. That appealed to nobody. Nobody. And I could not believe that they did it. And that's why I say the Democratic Party right now is where the Republicans were 20 years ago. That's how much the Overton window has shifted to the right. And
Right.
so it's amazing to me that some Democrats will look at the Joe Biden administration and say, well, that's the most progressive administration ever. Well, first of all, no, it's not. It's not as progressive as Jimmy Carter was. So that's in my lifetime. Certainly, it wasn't progressive as Lyndon Johnson was, or Kennedy, or FDR. So this idea that Joe Biden was a progressive presidency that appealed to younger people, I don't know if that's what they were trying for, but there was no meat behind that. The IRA itself, the infrastructure, the Inflation,
It's the Inflation Reduction Act that included a lot of infrastructure
included
bills.
a lot of the, okay, so yeah, it got sold as, hey, we are spending more money on climate action than we ever have in the past. Okay, so that may be true, but you've never spent any money on climate action in the past, so that's a
Right.
very, very low bar. It's really a sleight of hand sell when
Right.
the amount of money put towards climate action is still about 6% of the military budget. And the
Right.
military is the biggest polluter on the planet. The biggest non-state polluter on the planet is the US military. So you're saying you're going to spend 6% of the military budget. You're not going to put any requirements on the military to reduce emissions, because anytime you have those climate accords and climate agreements like the COP 26, 27, 28, the military was exempt from all of that. And on top of that, I wanted to say this. The bill itself required that millions of acres of land and offshore were leased to drill before any climate action money was spent. It was a fossil fuel bill in the same way that the AHA, as I would call the Obamacare bill, was a gift to the health insurance industries. My frustration with the Democrats is that they are simply the other party of the billionaire and ownership class, and they don't approve anything unless it satisfies their donors. And this really
Right.
goes to the crux of what our problem is in this country, is that we have a two-party system, both parties, which are captured 100% by the same interests.
Yep. Yep. We haven't even gotten to the third question. I don't even know what state or city you live in.
I think I'm in Marysville.
You're bringing up so much reality, and I want to praise you, which I know you don't need or anything like that. Just first and foremost, the stuff with the Democratic Party, right? You're not the first guest I've had who went headfirst into volunteering with the Democratic Party and was rudely awakened by the structural oppression that happens when you are not completely in line with what they want to do and how they want to do it. And that is something that I don't think people really understand, is that when you have energized people who are ready to give their time, energy, and money towards a cause, and you just placate them and don't provide any meaningful inclusion in changing strategy or changing policy, then you piss off a ton of people. And we're talking about people like yourself and others that I talk to who have dedicated years, if not decades, to the party and how the party operates, only to be disappointed at how non-receptive they are to change. And so that's hopefully a theme that is coming from this podcast and a message to Democrats, institutional Democrats, that we can't continue to operate the same way and expect to get those younger voters that you were talking about and those progressive folks who believe that some real structural change needs to happen for us to live in a healthy society, right?
I mean, I just to follow up on that, what is it that the Democratic Party actually wants? What does the leadership of the Democratic Party want? Because
Right.
coming out of this election, what I hear from people who I would consider the stalwart
Yep.
Democratic Party pundits is
Sure.
that the Democratic Party catered too much to the left and actually needs to move to the right. And for me, I'm like, we guys, I can't believe you're saying that, because there's no basis in reality for that. From my perspective, who are you speaking to? Who is it? And again, the Democratic Party strategy, as I said, the Democrats always said that they're a big tent, but for me, it seems like that tent only opens to the right, you know,
Right.
and
Right.
that they are trying to capture. That was a strategy for the Democrats, was to try and capture moderate Republicans and not worry about the left, right?
Yeah.
But when you leave out the left, and I the terms left and right are only minimally useful in this case, because we're talking about students and we're talking about working class people and we're talking about,
We don't care one way or another.
I
Or
mean,
like,
they want to be able to pay their rent,
right.
without
Right.
having to work three jobs. And they don't want to be saddled with $100,000 in student debt by the time they graduate from college. I'll just say, from my perspective, I've got two kids. My kids are 18 and 21 right now. They're not looking at college. They're both like, yeah, I don't want to take on tons of debt. I'm like, that's
Yeah.
fine, because now my son is going to go into construction trades and he's going to make a decent wage right away. I have no
Totally.
problem with that. My parents basically forced me to go to college. When you grew up in my timeline
That's
where
what
I
was
was,
pushed.
my parents were like, it was just expected that you were going to go to college. I don't
Right.
put those expectations on my kids these days. One, because I think the timeline for human survival is very, very short. And I don't necessarily want my kids to waste their time in college. Not that I don't think that there's value to it, but I also don't want them to be burdened by debt, where, most of the rest of the world has this thing figured out, that education is a benefit to society.
Say that. Oh my gosh. Which brings up, thank you for your service as a teacher. I've always been of the thought that our teachers are first responders in the need to create knowledge and a healthy working base. Next question I have for you, Jason, because we will continue to talk.
Nice.
What state and city do you live in?
I'm in Marysville, Washington.
Okay. And
Marysville, that was in the second district until I got cut out of the second district by 2 miles after the census. I don't know if you were aware that happened, but
I did not know that happened.
so this is another thing that pissed me off about the Democratic Party, was I got very, very close. People think that I ran sort of a futile race against incumbent Rick Larson, but in two races I got very, very close. The first race that I ran on, I spent maybe, I think we raised $53,000 in total, and I came in within 1% of second place.
Right.
And so that told me that people really are interested in the change of leadership in this, and they are interested in the change of leadership in a progressive direction. And I think that as close as I got the first time around, I think that made the Democratic Party extremely nervous. And just as a precautionary measure, because all the boundaries for the districts got redrawn after the 2020 census, they said, let's put this guy outside of the second district. And so they did.
I mean, and that's a function of the corruption in the system, right? The two-party system has all the power to draw lines without any. I mean, there's some judicial pushback or whatnot, but the point is, if the audience knew Jason Call and his kind of legacy here in Snohomish County, and I say that with a little bit of laugh because he does have a legacy and he did make a mark here in Snohomish County, for them to gerrymander you out of a district is not surprising.
I had people who knew people on the district and commission who said, hey, yeah, they're kind of taking you out.
Right.
So I was like, all right, well, that's Democrats. There's a whole story about that I can tell you. There was a very, very, if I can just sort of interject here, like why I'm so opposed to the Democratic Party right now, because I think there will never be an opportunity for progressive movement within the Democratic Party. you would consider them part of the squad, although they were sort of very quietly part of the squad, was a representative in Illinois' 6th district named Marie Newman. And she got elected in 2020 and she got unelected in 2022. And I got an opportunity to have a sort of private conversation with her and some other people a couple of years ago after she was removed from her district. And she basically said, when you're elected as a freshman congressman, there's a lot of fanfare. But yes, leadership takes all of the freshmen into a room and they tell you how it's going to be. And they say, you're going to follow our direction. If you cause us any trouble, we'll make sure you don't have your seat next time. Well, Marie Newman was quietly one of the best introducers of legislation. She introduced in 2 years 260 something bills. And she was very progressive. She was progressive along the lines of Cori Bush, Rashida Tlaib, AOC, who I don't even consider progressive anymore. She's a complete turncoat. But what happened was when Illinois lost a seat after the census, so they had however many districts they had, and they lost it. When the lines got redrawn, she got put into a district with another ostensibly very progressive Democrat. And she said, I knew that they had targeted me for this. And they put me up against Chuy Garcia, and they said, we'll let you fight it out. Well, to her credit, she says, Chuy's a great representative. I'm not going to primary him. And she tried to go back and primary the guy that the DNC had wanted, and she lost her primary, and that was out. But the story there was they purposely redistricted so that the House would lose a progressive, like the Democratic Party would lose a progressive one way or the other. And she said, yeah, they 100% did that on purpose.
Yeah, I don't feel like this hour segment is long enough to really, unpack a lot of the knowledge.
Probably not, but I'd be happy to come back.
Well, and I'm opening that door because I really think that you have some great perspective that people don't understand. So the next question I have, still on the demographics, what do you do? What do you do? You were a teacher.
I was a teacher after I got pushed out of education, literally with a do not hire reference from one of my principals, because there's a whole story behind that, but I was a pain in his neck about doing better for students, and he was close to retirement, and he just did not want. I think he thought I'd caused him enough headache, and he didn't want to pass that headache on to another principal, which it would have been. I'm going to be a headache to any principal. There's no doubt about it, but for all the right reasons. And then I now work for a property and liability insurance company, an international insurance company, doing commercial building inspections for safety. But that's what I do. I drive around the state. I go out to the peninsula. I go out to north central Washington, up to the border, Omak and Oroville. I go out to Yakima and Ellensburg, and I go walk through properties and make sure that their buildings aren't falling apart and that their fire protections are all in place. And it's a very grunt job, but it pays me enough to pay a few bills and also have health insurance, which is really most right now. Would I rather be in the classroom? Absolutely. But such is life. That's the way it goes.
So the next question I have is, what is a credential that you use most often to sell yourself on job applications?
Well, I haven't applied for a job for 6 years, but a credential for job applications as a teacher, it would just be prior experience as a teacher, although my license has expired for a number of years now.
What kind of teacher were you?
High school math. I taught upper level math classes. I taught all the college prep stuff, AP calculus, AP statistics, pre-calc, and all of that stuff. That was actually, just since you've asked, that was one of the things that got me in trouble with the principal who didn't want to hire me anymore.